Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of True Lies. Great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I've talked about this before, but I'm not familiar with the movie True Lies, the one with Arnold Schwarzenegger and, Jamie Lee Curtis. But I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I've never seen it. I actually didn't even know the full premise of it until I saw this trailer for this show, and I was like, oh, so that's what True Lies was about? You know, it makes sense with the title and everything. But also based on, like, the opening to this, because there was, like, apparently this is based on something else that True Lies was based on. Like, there's, like, a movie that True Lies was based on. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I had no idea. I guess, like, True Lies was, like, an American adaptation of something. I mean, we have a tendency to do that. It's like, you know, a great example is like, I had no idea. It wasn't until years after the fact I found out The Departed is based on like a French film, I think it's called. I think it's a French film. But nevertheless, so that was kind of interesting. But I like this style of show, kind of like this action-y comedy spy thriller. Obviously, the show I can think of more recently that kind of fell in, I mean, obviously it's been a couple years, but Whiskey Cavalier fell into that category. I guess you could make the argument about Killing Eve, but I feel like Killing Eve had its jokey comedy side to it as well, but it leaned more into drama. I feel like this one leaned more in its comedy side of things. We got Steve Howey, which I know, I first got introduced to him in the sitcom Reba. I'm a big fan of that sitcom. That was my first introduction to him. I know he was in Shameless. I haven't seen a lot of Shameless. I've only seen bits and pieces, but I know he was in Shameless for a while. And, I wish I remembered the actress who plays his wife. I was like, because I didn't remember she was in this because I saw the trailer like months ago. But then when I saw her, I was like, She played Jennifer's best friend, Nikki, in She-Hulk. I was like, oh, that's super dope. But yeah, I mean, the whole premise behind it is like, hey, this guy, Harry, he's a spy, but he's keeping it secret from his wife, Helen. And obviously he's part of a team, which includes Gibb, who, obviously that actor, I've seen him in a multitude of things. I know he was in CSI Miami back in the day. I'd say the most recent thing I saw him in is the short-lived show, The Unicorn, which I love that show. I'm so bummed that only got 2 seasons. But I'd probably say that's the most recent-ish thing I've probably seen him in, I think. Could have sworn there was something else he was in fairly recently, but maybe it was just The Unicorn. So Harry kind of broke the taboo, like, because obviously, like, you have to go through a lot of leaps with the whole, like, dating someone, consider being a part of a mega sector and everything like that, but Harry kind of went an extra mile. Not only did he get married, he also has a full-blown family, which I knew he was married, but I didn't remember them having kids. That adds a whole other extra element to it, so it's like, oh, cool, not only are you lying to your kids, but, I mean, more importantly, you're lying to your wife, but you're also lying to your kids, but it's like, hey, I work at this computer selling company, and I love the whole thing of, like, oh, yeah, they're number 3 in the world, or whatever, and then like later on, like Harry's like, well, number 2, and then at the end of the episode, it shows up the business. It's like, oh, insert name of like, oh, we're number 3, and then it like deletes that, says number 2. I was like, oh, I like that. But yeah, like I said, it just seems like that kind of fun, action-y comedy series. First, they were kidnapping a weapons dealer. It's like, yeah, honey, I'm kind of stuck at this sales conference, which you could already tell, like, there were starting to be cracks when, like, the kids are like, yeah, dad ends up kind of canceling last minute a lot, ends up stuck at a lot of sale conferences, and Helen's just kind of like, yeah, it is what it is. It just happens from time to time. Harry shows up. Obviously, he has to, they backtrack a lot of stuff to be like, okay, you got this gift from the kids. It's like, hey, you have to, because the only reason why they have to give him such a heavy cover, you probably have your typical everyday covers in case you need to, like a simple lie or whatever, but it's like you need an extensive cover when you have a family, have everything like backdated, receipts, oh, you got this gift from here, and there, where did you stay? It's like, yeah, and apparently they've been together for like 17 years, so he's had to do this for a while, and I think that's probably why he's like, I got this. It's like, I've had to do this like a lot over the course of our marriage and our family, so he brings them, like, you would think you would at least spring for more exotic gifts, but I guess it's like, right, you don't want it to be exotic because it's supposed to be like, oh, I was in Cleveland. I don't want to admit that I was in the Caribbean. It's like, right, you need low-key gifts so it goes along with like, oh, the boring job that you have, that it's, here's some boring gifts that you brought back. And I do like they introduced it earlier in the episode about Helen, that she's looking for a little excitement. Like, she's like burning rubber in the van. And I'm like, oh, I was like, is that going to all be in her head, or did she really do it? It's like, no, she really did it because she's looking for some excitement in her life, because it's like, oh, cool, we really don't go anywhere. Oh, you brought me this guidebook to 100 places we'll never end up going. You know, the kids end up getting like their son gets like a baseball cap. The daughter gets like a snow globe. I figured she was up to something shady when like her mom walked in and she was like, oh, no, I'm just messing with the snow globes. It's like, you're hiding something back there. You find out later on what it is. It's alcohol. So there's that. But her friend ended up kind of convincing her, like, hey, your husband might have a secret of his own. It's like, oh, yeah, it's about to turn into that conundrum of now your wife's going to start suspecting you're having an affair, which is like, ugh. I almost expected Gibb to be like, well, you should have let her think you're having an affair. It's like, no, he was going like, right, you want to fix your relationship when she's thinking you're cheating on her? Suggest like you're part of some secret football fantasy league or something like that. Don't actually invite her on the mission that they get tasked with, because this is all about a weapon that's very powerful. It's like a new weapon that's on the market. The arms dealer they got already sold it, so it's like okay, we got to track down that person. He was home for like a day before. It's like, yeah, you got to go to Paris to find this weapon, because we found the person this is where the drop off is going to end up happening, so we have to get the weapon immediately. So sadly, they got recommended. Harry and his team got recommended because they're the best at what they do. Specifically, it seems like Harry's like the go-to guy, the go-to spy. But I think it's interesting. I guess it's like he gets results done because he's the actiony dude. Like, he'll get stuff done, but it's not like he's like multifaceted and everything, because you would think as a spy he'd be very good at different languages, and it's like, no, I guess all the things that he has shortcomings as a spy, his wife kind of feels it, because I think he's kind of more. And maybe you can almost make a parallel to like the Bond movies. I'm not well versed in Bond, but I've heard enough people talk about Bond. Like, you talk about Daniel Craig's Bond is a little more like knuckle brawl, like that's how those movies are designed. Whereas like obviously the older ones were a little more chic, and like suaveness was kind of like your more typical traditional Bond. So it seems like Harry might be that. He kind of might be like, hey, I could get stuff done, but I'm more the blunt object. And his wife Helen kind of fills that void a little bit of like, right, what he's lacking in his spyhood, I kind of compensate for it because she's a language teacher, so she's well versed in languages, which comes in handy. But you would think as a spy, you think you would know multiple languages because it probably comes in handy. But once again, his thing is probably like, I probably don't get into like the more nuanced elements of spyhood. I probably just like keep it low key, just enough to get by, but I'm not just going to be like I'm a chameleon. I can blend in. I could definitely see that end up being an element that's very key to Helen. Once again, I think they're going to be this interesting duo. You know what I also thought about too? I was like, all right, because I know they were making a Mr. and Mrs. Smith show for Prime Video. This was years ago, because it was supposed to be Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Donald Glover. I think one of them backed out of it. Like, it was going to be like they were behind the scenes on it and in front of the camera. I don't know where that is. I haven't looked into that in like a long time, so that might not be in the works anymore. I think one of them backed out. I don't remember if it was Donald or Phoebe, but one of them wasn't going to, like, I think star in it. I don't even know if it was like the writing process or still thing. But regardless, that's another one that's like in that same vein. But obviously in this case, Helen isn't a spy. She's becoming a spy, but still. But yeah, that is kind of interesting, like inviting your wife to the on the mission. But it's like, yeah, I was like, what else was I supposed to do? My wife just blatantly told me like she thought our marriage was in trouble, and he's like, I thought I had it on lock. He was so busy going through the motions of things that because he is away so often, he never realized like, oh. I mean, once again, the boring gifts are the boring gifts, but I do wonder, did he get those gifts because he legitimately thought, hey, he is kind of missing out on some of his kids' lives. It's like, oh, like my son doesn't really care about that. My daughter has other interests and stuff like that. Obviously, I think that's going to become a more prevalent element as the show progresses, because Helen's the one with the kids most of the time because he was away a lot of the time missing out on it. So I think that's going to be kind of a bit of a thing that Harry kind of has to kind of deal with and kind of come to terms with that. Hey, kids might not be who I thought they were anymore. I think it's only a matter of time before his kids find out. Now, whether that's going to be before the end of the season or whatever, we'll ultimately have to wait and see. But that might be something they stretch out a little bit more, or maybe I don't know. They might have to tell the kids eventually, or maybe the kids are going to think something's up, but maybe they never quite find out, type of thing. We'll have to wait and see. But circling back to it, it's like, I even love her getting on Gib. The fact is, I was like, yeah, I put out all these cheeses and he ate them. And I love he got defensive about it later. He's like, besides, I wasn't the only, well, she's also mad at you, Gib, because you're eating all her cheese. And he was like, besides, I wasn't the only one eating cheese, you know? So either way, Paris and everything, it's like, oh, cool, this is fun and everything. But, you know, they did the whole thing, got the weapon, mission accomplished. But problem is, one of the bad guys followed Harry because he's like, right, his priorities were a little scattered. He wasn't taking the precautions he needed to. Once again, that's why it's like, yeah, Harry's good at what he does, but I think it's a limited capacity as a spy of what he does. I don't think, like I said, he's not like the world-rounded, like, oh my god, he's the world's greatest spy. It's like, yeah, when it comes to doing what you do and getting the job done, you're the best. Like I said, I think he is more blunt object, like steamrolling ahead, like, you know, when it turns into a shootout type of thing, I got this. Which obviously we saw, like, he can be the more actiony dude when he needs to be, when it comes to the whole situation of at the dinner that they're having, and he catches a glimpse like, oh, like, there's people here with guns. And I love that wasn't just him fighting, like, Nikki helped too. I mean, I'm calling her Nikki by her character from She-Hulk. Helen helped out too. And I was like, oh. And he's like, well, how do you know how to fight? And she's like, oh yeah, for my exercise video. And he's like, what exercise videos got you like punching? And she's like, how do you know to use the gun? He's like, yeah, I'm just pulling the trigger. I took like some Taekwondo classes or something like that. Like, even in the heat of things, he's kind of lying. I mean, you kind of have to like still form back into your normal. So you're just like, oh man, things are crazy. And I love when they got captured. It's still a thing of like, yeah, you got the wrong people. What? I'm a spy? What? That's crazy. That's wild. Having to lie about Helen being like, yeah, she's my supervisor. I mean, what kind of person would bring like a useless teacher on a mission? You had to be an idiot to do something like that, you know? But she had to kind of play up the role of like, yeah, I'm the supervisor and stuff like that. So it's like, right, that way they don't just go ahead and kill Helen because it's like, oh, she's useless. Like, if you think she's a spy that you could get information out of, you also didn't want to bring up the fact it's like, oh, this is actually my wife. Like I said, I even love he tried. He's like, hey, honey, like, I got this. Like, I dealt with negotiations because I sell computers. Which that early on, too, was a big question I had. I was like, okay, we see the business and stuff up there. And I was like, okay. I was like, so is this all? Because when he walked in, I was like, are we going to find out the office is actually empty? But it's like, no, it's not. And there was people working there. I was like, okay. So it's like, are you all spies? And then he takes the elevator. So I was like, okay, so it is an actual legit. So it's not just like this place is a front and it's BS. No, it's like it is an actual business, but are all the people spies? It's like, okay, but we got a clarification at the end of the episode, which I really appreciated, that there are people who have no idea that this is like a spy operation in the basement. That is just kind of, well, I guess it's in the basement. I'd assume the facilities are in the basement. But it's like, yeah, there are people like out front, like when they were like, oh yeah, how'd that conference go? Oh, it's great. It's like, oh, there are people who legitimately work at this business. I love that the way Harry explains it. It's like, oh no, we all sell computers here. It's just some of us have the whole side job of being spies too, so. But understandably, Helen is upset. She has every right to be. Once again, he's been lying to her for 17 years. Before they even got together, before they even started dating, he was already a spy, I think. So, it is implying that was the case. So it's like, yeah, that's understandable. You know, it's like, right, your entire relationship is a lie. Like, you're not even the person I thought you were because that person doesn't exist because that was all a lie. And it's like, honey, like, we'll kind of figure this out. You know, it's like, yeah, I actually am a spy. It's like, I wasn't in Cleveland. I was in the Caribbean. You know, it's like, oh, that time you missed our anniversary. It's like, yeah, I was in Argentina saving the president. It's like, oh, of course you were. And once again, he wants to go in and going back and going to the point I was making earlier about who he is tactically. He's like, oh, let's go guns a-blazing. And she's like, no, there's like 8 people out there. He's like, well, we have no other choice but to shoot our way up. She's like, how about you pretend to be a guard? And it's like, how about, and you announce on it, like, it's like, but then they are expecting 2 prisoners. It's like, well, just say you're bringing me out first. It's like, I don't know how to speak, boss. And she's like, well, I'll teach you how. So she's more tactical savvy than he is. Like I said, I think she's going to be the brains. He's going to be more so the brawn. And they're going to also help make each other, like, they kind of will end up completing each other. I'm sure he'll help her on the more, like, physical elements, and she'll help them on the more tactical, knowledgeable, like wisdom elements too. Like I think they, once again, as a duo, I think they will compensate for each other's shortcomings in that regard. I also love that it's like, or what about the kids? Did you think about putting them in danger? It's like, don't worry, Miss Myers next door is going to look after him. It's like, the cat lady is like, yes, she's a trained assassin. And I love the hard cut to her showing off the pictures of the cats and boring both of the children out of their mind. Because like immediately the son noticed, like, he's like, whoa, there's construction. Like, why are they starting it? Like, didn't they finish that up last week? It's like, right. So I guess anytime he goes out on a mission, he has people stand nearby just to keep an eye on his family in general. So I guess that's kind of an implication of like, oh, or maybe when jobs kind of go sideways maybe a little bit, it's like, just in case this falls back on my family, people are here to keep in line. So I wonder, what does Miss Myers do, like, other than keep, like, is that kind of like her full-time job, or is that like two of her jobs? Like, she has her spy thing, the assassin thing that she does, she has looking after Harry and Helen's family, and then is there like a thing she does on an everyday basis? I wonder, does she actually have those cats? Are they actually hers to kind of play into her cover? Or are they just like BS photos she has on her phone that she took from the internet or something? Or maybe someone else's legitimate cats that they just put on her phone just to kind of keep up the cat lady element. Once again, the whole thing of the spyhood thing is to be unassuming, hence Harry's boring job and Miss Myers being a cat lady. Obviously, it was a bumpy road getting out, but luckily, Harry and Helen did. The guy that they knocked off, like, that guy is like, did he die? I mean, he fell pretty far, didn't he land on like a car or something? I don't know if he's dead or we're going to see him pop up later on. But that actor, I was like, I've seen that actor, and God, I know he was in 24, but it's like, there's something else I know him from, and I just can't think of it off the top of my head what it is I know him from. Because I definitely know 24, because he was like Chloe's, was it her current husband or ex-husband? That was immediately when I was thinking too. I was like, oh, the spy connection in that regard, just because I was like 24 spy intelligence-esque stuff. So, but I'm like, that actor, I was like, I know him from something else too. He was a bad guy in something that I'm like, I don't remember if he was like a multi-art character, whether he was in like, it's like that actor, I've just seen him in some stuff. I'd have to look into it, but I'm like, I feel like there's something fairly recently, super recently, that I know him from, but I just can't place it. But yeah, because Helen knows about Omega Sector now, it's like, cool, you got to be a part of this. Like, this is for your protection, because you could be a liability, not only to your self and your own safety, but also to this whole operation. So now you're going to get trained about everything. Harry kind of knew this was kind of the typical protocol. I guess he always knew it would be an eventuality in case Helen ever did find out. So that's why I feel like they're probably not going to be too quick to make the kids that. I mean, but, oh God, I didn't even think about Spy Kids, which is so interesting too. I should have thought about that to some extent, just because it's like, well, connective tissue that I'm like, it's a deep thread, but it's like, right. Meghan Trainor is on, I was just watching the Whiskey Ginger podcast, Andrew Santino's podcast, with the Meghan Trainor episode. And it's like, well, if you don't know, God, what's her husband's name? He's the son from, Spy Kids. I also know him from, I don't know how much voice acting work he's done, but I know him from, there's a show, I think I know him for sadly 3 seasons on Cartoon Network called Generator X. I know he voiced like Rex in that. And that's one of the things I know for him besides Spy Kids. But it's like, yeah, that's Meghan Trainor's husband. When I found out, I was like, oh, I had no idea. That's so interesting. But yeah, that's why I was like connective tissue of like, oh yeah, that's funny. Like me recording this and having, I still need to finish the episode. I'm like probably like halfway through before I got like sidetracked with other stuff. So yeah. Also, I love Meghan Trainor. I always look like, I just love her in interviews, and I legitimately love her personality. She seems like the dopest person ever, and she kills it on the musical front too. It's like, you have a dope personality and you're super talented, so that's always awesome. But tensions and all that aside, but getting back to the point I was making, the point was I started with the whole Spy Kid things because I was like, well, not unless the kids could, but I don't know what their not unless it's something Harry and Helen keep, like the kids find out but never tell Omega Sector that they know. Maybe that's kind of, like I said, that depends on if they get to that at all this season. It might be like a end of the season thing, might be partway through the season. We'll ultimately have to wait and see. But it's like, yeah, getting kind of, it's like, but for Harry, it's like, he's looking at the positive of all of this, because it's like, hey, now there's no more line, we can be completely open. It's like, right, well, you were worried about us, but now, like, there's nothing between us anymore. We can, in the regards of, like, hey, there's no more lies, it could all be truthful, you're a part of this now, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that you lied to her for so long. It's like, yeah, you said you couldn't eat certain foreign food because it upsets your stomach. It's like, well, certain foreign food does upset my stomach, so it's like, it's not all lies. So it's like, oh, so nevertheless, it's like that whole, like, I love they make a point of it with, like, the whole, like, because I appreciate that aesthetic thing of, like, oh, operation, reinstating, like, you're reinserting yourself back into your normal life, come down from, like, once again, getting all the stuff you need to kind of fill in the void of, like, okay, this is what we were up to, this is where we stay, like, oh, nothing crazy or spy related happened, we just had a normal vacation. But the kids are picking it up from the, like, looking inside, they're like, they don't look like they were happy in a vacation, like, why they come back, like, for one, like, just looking like that. But it's like, hey, we got to put up the front, he's like, do it for the kids' sake, and he was like, kind of mind, because we're in this together, we're a team. So I'm sure there's still going to be some bumpy roads ahead, kind of like figuring out this new dynamic. But I'm really enjoying it. I thought it was kind of a nice, really nice start to the series, and I'm excited to see more spy funny shenanigans kind of go down as we get to know the team even more, and kind of see what operations they go on, what's the next spy adventure down the road. So I'm excited to see where things end up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.